It's important to recognize that when we grow oats and when we grow alfalfa, we don't spray those crops. We do clip them after the oat harvest to suppress the weeds, and certainly the removal of 3 to 5 cuts of alfalfa in the year following the seeding is very effective for weed control. So just by increasing diversity to include oats and alfalfa or oats and clover, you reduce the number of years that you spray, and you can get a 33 to 50% reduction in herbicide load just by doing that.
You know, weeds just are very adaptable, and having that the small grains in there really breaks up the weed cycle. And it provides a different way of suppressing weeds that corn and soybeans simply don't have.
Spring wheat with the early planting date, it's very competitive earlier in the year as a cool season grass. It suppresses a number of those weeds that are trying to get started later in the spring. And so we saw a decrease in prevalence of water hemp, lamb's quarters, velvet leaf, kind of the 3 main weeds that we deal with on our farm. We saw a decrease in those, allowed us to reduce herbicide use because of that early season competitiveness.
If we can be growing a crop like small grains as a cover very early in the year, it will start to compete and hopefully outcompete with some of our more troublesome weeds. And maybe we can start learning how to get away from so many applications of chemicals.
If you want to develop a weed management program, you basically have to think about weed population dynamics the way you look at your bank account. You have a certain amount in the account. We call that the weed seed bank, and that's the pool of potential recruits that can emerge in a crop and infest it. And weed seeds have dormancy, so they can live more than 1 year. Different species live different amounts of time in the soil. So every time a weed is successful in escaping cultivation or spraying or mowing, it produces a certain amount of seed, and those seeds enter the soil seed bank if they're not intercepted and consumed by birds, insects, rodents, other things. Okay, so when those seeds go into the soil, a certain number of them die. They decay, they germinate at the wrong time and aren't able to make a new weed. Or they come out of the seed bank and farmers kill them with herbicides or cultivation. So when you want to figure out the dynamics of are weed problems getting better or worse on your farm, you really got to know how many seeds are you putting into the seed bank and how many of them are coming out. And of the ones that come out, how many of them are successful in infesting your crop. There's some other complications too. We have dispersal. Weeds can move in manure, they can move on animal hides, they can move on farm machinery. So it's possible to infest a field with a new species through immigration. Some people are working with special attachments to combines to grind up seeds that are picked up in the harvest operations for the crops. So that's a form of emigration. Anyway, if you do all the balances of what goes in and what goes out, you can figure out, okay, am I gaining or am I losing weed control? And diversified rotations give you a variety of options to create stress and impose mortality on weed populations. You can do it chemically at different times depending on the crop. You can do it mechanically at different times depending on the crop. The crops themselves have different growth cycles, and so for instance some crops that are planted early like oats will have a major problem with early emerging weeds like giant ragweed if you don't control the weed. Other crops that are planted late like soybean will typically have problems with later warm season weeds like water hemp. So the kinds of weeds we have reflect the kinds of crops and the associated crop management practices, and when we move towards a more diverse system, we impose a wider range of stress and mortality factors on those weed populations. And by tipping the balance towards more death and away from seeds being deposited in the soil, we can begin to drop the weed seed bank to lower and lower levels, and that allows us to use less and less herbicide and to feel less anxious when we have to cultivate when the weather's not cooperating.